communism in the Philippines emerged in the first half of the 20th century during the period of American colonial rule, stemming from labor unions and peasant groups. The communist movement has had multiple periods of popularity and relevance to the national affairs of the country, most notably during the Second World War and the martial law era periods. Currently, the communist movement is forced underground and is considered to be by the armed forces of the Philippines as an insurgent movement. The communist movement in the Philippines officially began in 1930 with the formation of the Partido Komunista in Pilipinas. The party was outlawed in 1932 by a decision from the Supreme Court, but was technically legalized in 1938. During the Second World War, the Pkp played a part in guerrilla warfare against the Japanese occupation forces by way of the Hukbong-Bayan Laban sa Hapon. The Pkp took a more moderate stance, supporting efforts by the Osmeña administration for social reform, before fully committing itself to the support of armed struggle by the Huks. Efforts by the government under Elpidio Quirino and Ramon Magsaysay eventually thwarted the insurrection, culminating with the surrender of the Huk Supremo, Luis Taruc, in 1954. The Pkp was again officially outlawed by the government, this time by virtue of Republic Act 1700, or the Anti-Subversion Law. By this time the Pkp took a more moderate stance, shifting its focus from armed struggle to a parliamentary one. Major arrests occurred during this period, the biggest one being the arrest of the Secretary-General of the Pkp, Jesus Lava, in 1964. In 1968, a new Communist Party of the Philippines was formed by Amado Guerrero. Its military arm, the New People's Army, was formed the next year and was headed by Commander Dante. The CPP Mao Tse-tung thought splintered from the old Pkp, clashing with it ideologically, reflecting the Sino-Soviet split. The CPP and the NPA fought against the Philippine government during the time of the Marcos dictatorship. In 1972, at the onset of martial law, Sison was arrested and sentenced to jail for 9 years. He has since went on exile. Crisanto Evangelista era, labor unions and early influence. Communist documents, such as the official history of the CPP as written by José Lava, make references to Andrés Bonifacio as a direct inspiration to the communist revolution, thus painting the communist movement as a continuation of the unfinished revolution started by the Katipunan. Sources claim that Isabelo de los Reyes, an illustrator, can be considered to be one of the first Filipino labor leaders. De los Reyes founded the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, headed by Gregorio Alipay, and the Union Obrera Democrática, the first labor federation in the Philippines. De los Reyes was influenced by Francisco Ferrer, an anarcho-syndicalist he met during a stay in prison in Barcelona, Spain. In 1901, De los Reyes brought back to the Philippines what can be considered the first batch of socialist literature, consisting of writings by Proudhon, Bakunin, Malatesta and other leftists of the period. 2 years later, Lope K. Santos would start publication of his socialist novel, By Nagat Sikat. It was from labor unions that the first socialist and communist groups came from. The earlier known labor union in the Philippines was the Union de Litographos y Impresores de Filipinas, headed by Hermenegildo Cruz. Cruz then helped De los Reyes form the UOD in 1902. De los Reyes' involvement in the UOD only lasted 3 months, before he was arrested and subsequently pardoned by William H. Taft. De los Reyes decided to retire from the UOD and devote his time to politics. The UOD was succeeded by Dr. José María Dominador Gómez, who rechristened it the Unión Obrero Democrática de Filipinas. On May 1, 1903, Gómez and the UODF led a labor demonstration to Malacanang, which incidentally was the first observance of Labor Day in the Philippines. Gómez was arrested by the end of the month, but was eventually acquitted in the Supreme Court. He then resigned from the UODF and similarly shifted his attention to politics. At this point, the UODF was dissolved, and Lopez Santos took the remnants of the group and organized them into the Unión del Trabajo de Filipinas. The UTF lasted until 1907 before it broke up due to intramural troubles and mismanagement of funds. In 1906, Crisanto Evangelista formed the Unión de Impresores de Filipinas, having been influenced by Santos Bernardo Sikat. Evangelista was one of the leading trade union leaders of the time, having first come from UOD and the UODF. Compared to the two previous unions, which were nationalist unions in nature, the UIF was more socialist, adopting the slogan, "The emancipation of the workers must be achieved by the workers themselves." On May 1, 1913, the Congreso Obrero de Filipinas was founded, with Hermenegildo Cruz as its first president. Cruz was replaced a few years later by Francisco Verona, a newspaperman. The COF was destined to become the biggest and most organized labor union in the country until 1929. Evangelista became a high-ranking member of the COF, eventually becoming the national secretary in 1924. It was by this time that Evangelista became acquainted with Harrison George, top-ranking member of the Communist Party of the United States of America, and with Tan Malaka, co-founder of the Partido Komunista Indonesia. Malaka, at the time, was in exile, and played the role of an Indonesian nationalist. Malaka also met with other leftist-leaning labor leaders such as Cappadocia, Balgos, and Felio, before being deported to Amoy on August 22, 1927. Harrison George returned to the Philippines for a second visit in 1927. George was accompanied by Earl Browder, Chief Secretary of the Pan-Pacific Trade Union Secretariat. Browder met with Evangelista and other labor leaders, resulting in the COF's decision to send Evangelista, Jacinto Manahan, and Serlio Bognet to the Profintern Conference in Moscow in March 1928. On the return, Evangelista organized the first batch of Filipino pensionados to study in Moscow's University of Toilers of the East. Two more groups were sent in 1929 and 1930. Formation of the Pkp in 1928. Conservative elements of the COF were alarmed by the increasing radicalization of Evangelista and his group, and took advantage of their absence by calling a national convention on May 1 of that year. Verona and Evangelista were ousted, and were replaced by Hilario Barraga and Domingo Ponce, respectively. While the move was orchestrated by Evangelista's enemies in the COF, Ruperto Cristobal, Isabelo Tejada, and Antonio Paguia, Evangelista had plans for radical reorganization of the trade union movement, which would lay the groundwork for the communist movement in the Philippines. These plans were almost thwarted in 1928, but Evangelista chose to bide his time for the following year's conference. The next year, Evangelista and his group submitted a draft thesis which called for measures such as the adoption of a collective leadership, establishment of a workers' party, the promotion of class struggle, and so on. The thesis was allowed to pass to the May Convention. where the conservative group allegedly used dummy Labour delegates to ensure that the radical measure was blocked. Evangelista and his group walked out of the convention, and the COF was split. 12 days later, on May 12, 1929, a new Labour federation known as the Katipunan ng Mga Anak sa Pilipinas was formed, consisting of 27 of the 35 unions of the COF. On August 26 of the next year, a new political party was organized from members of the Pkp, the Partido Komunista in Pilipinas. The party itself was formalized as an official entity on November 7 of the same year. These two dates correspond with the cry of Pagudloin and the Russian Revolution, respectively, symbolically linking the Pkp with the nationalist and the communist revolutions. Formation of other movements. While the Pkp was mostly concerned with the urban workers in Manila, other leftist groups were similarly being formed. In 1919, Jacinto Manahan founded the Union de periods.The Filipinas. The union expanded its activities in 1922 and was renamed the Confederación de Repasadores y Obreros Agrícolas de Filipinas. In 1925, the name was changed to the Kalipunang Pambansa ng Mga Magbubukid sa Pilipinas, which became of the largest and most influential peasant labor groups during the interwar period, and became the precursor to the post-war Pambansang Kaisahan ng Mga Magbubukid. Members of the KPMP such as Manahan, Juan Felio, and Castor Alejandrino went on to become influential members to the Filipino communist movement. In 1932, Pedro Abad Santos independently formed the Socialist Party of the Philippines in central Luzon. The next year, Abad Santos founded the Agumanding Maldang Talapagabra. The AMT and the KPMP were both highly important in the peasant revolts and reforms of the 1930s, although neither group was formally socialist or communist. Members of both of these groups also formed a large section of the Hukbalahap. First outlawing of the Pkp, the newly formed Pkp immediately set out with its propaganda effort. The Pkp launched an aggressive organizational and propaganda drive among the peasants of central Luzon in Manila, holding public meetings almost daily. In January 1931, the Pkp opened its national headquarters in Quiapo, Manila, and also launched its official organ, the Titus, reminiscent of Lenin's Iskra. During this time, multiple incidents were attributed to the communists. On January 10, 1931, a peasant uprising occurred in Tayug, Pangasinan. This was blamed on the communists, although the Pkp itself was castigated by a foreign critic of not coordinating with the peasant rebels. Besides the Tayug revolt, other peasant uprisings that occurred during the time were attributed to the Pkp, and at times the Pkp took credit for them, although the truth was that at the time the Pkp was weak organizationally. Most members, including Evangelista, believed that the root of the revolution should come from the urban centers, while people like Manahan, Felio, Guillermo Cappadocia, and Mateo del Castillo believed that a strong peasant base was important in achieving the communist revolution. Nevertheless, the Pkp had no strong base in central Luzon at the time. In 1931, Antonio Hora died in an automobile accident in Nueva Ecija. Hora was a high-ranking member of the Pkp Politburo and Central Committee, widely regarded to be second only to Evangelista. Hora's funeral became the site of widespread demonstration, with as many as 50,000 workers marching through Manila. A wake was held in Hora's hometown, which was attended by 3,000 peasants. The most major incident concerning the first Pkp was on May 1, 1931. When the Communists were barred from holding the traditional Labor Day demonstration in Manila, the Pkp instead transferred the celebration to Caloocan, under the auspices of the KAP. This permit, however, was also revoked hours before the start of the scheduled start of the parade. A contingent of the Philippine Constabulary, under Captain Rafael Jalandoni, arrived to order Evangelista to cancel the parade. Evangelista instead raised his clenched fist and began an incendiary speech, and said, "Comrades and brethren, the municipal president, Mr. Aquino, has allowed us to hold the parade, but for reasons unknown to me the permit has been revoked. This shows that the big ones are persecuting and oppressing us, who are small, which they have no right to do." After this, Abelardo Ramos cried out, "Let us die fighting them." Evangelista attempted to continue his speech when the PC arrested him in Ramos. The assembled crowd then tried to advance on the constabulary but were forcibly dispersed by peace officers. Based on these events, the Manila Court of First Instance, on September 14, 1931, passed a decision declaring both the Pkp and KAP as a legal organization, and sentencing 20 communist leaders of 8 years and 1 day of banishment to the provinces. Evangelista was additionally sentenced with 6 months imprisonment and a fine of 400 pesos for sedition. The convicted communists brought an appeal to the Supreme Court, which affirmed the Manila CFI decision on October 26, 1932. Pkp Spp Merger. The American administration in the Philippines acknowledged and recognized that the convicted communists such as Evangelista, Manahan, Cappadocia, and Balgos were leaders in the trades and their cooperation would have been most beneficial. These men were given offers for executive clemency but were adamant in the refusal. Eventually Manahan would accept pardon from Gov. Frank Murphy in 1935, partly due to ideological differences between him and Evangelista and partly due to the intervention of Manuel Quezon. This, combined with Quezon assuming the presidency of the Commonwealth with his liberalism and genuine desire to garner the support of labor groups, allowed for an opening in rapprochement between him and Evangelista. The adoption of a united front against fascism by the Comintern also played a part in the release. Indiana 1936, James South Allen, a high-ranking official of the CPUSA, came to the Philippines to persuade Evangelista's group of accepting even a conditional pardon, under the argument that a united front must be maintained against world fascism. Allen then went to Quezon to successfully request the release of the communist leaders on December 31, 1936. He then returned in 1938 to secure an absolute pardon for the communist leaders, which was granted on December 24 of that same year. Given the full political rights, they were now able to act and implement the Comintern's call for a united front movement against fascism. Allen then mediated between Abad Santos SPP and Evangelista's Pkp to form a merger, despite their ideological differences. The new party was officially called the Communist Party of the Philippines, but was simply referred to as the Communist Party of the Philippines for short. The 3 top officers of the new Pkp were Evangelista, Abad Santos and Cappadocia, who were national chairman, vice chairman, and general secretary, respectively.